Hello, 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 and welcome back. Now, in part one of this series, we talked about the vision, the what, the why, and the who behind servant leadership. So if you have not watched that one yet, I want you to go back and watch that one first because today builds directly on top of that foundation that we built. Okay, so here's the problem I consistently see with faith driven entrepreneurs. You have a beautiful vision, a genuinely kingdom rooted why, and a team that has bought in emotionally, and then everything falls apart operationally the second you try to grow past what you can personally build together with your own two hands. But today, we're going to talk about the systems that actually let servant leadership scale beyond yourself instead of collapse under your own good intentions. Okay. So, welcome back to Building Foundations, where we build faith integrated businesses without compartmentalizing our convictions from our operations. If you are new here, then this is part two of a 3-part series. Okay. So I want you to go back and watch part one if you can, because you want to know the vision. You want to learn about vision before you talk about operations. Okay. And the order actually does matter. I put this together very carefully. So if you can, go back and watch part one. So let's talk about the uncomfortable truth. Let's just jump right in there and talk about the uncomfortable truth about good intentions. Now, here's something that nobody tells new leaders, and I wish someone had told me earlier. Good intentions without systems do not produce good outcomes. They produce inconsistency, and inconsistency, especially from a leader who genuinely cares, is more disorienting to a team than clear boundaries from a leader who doesn't. Why, you ask? Because your team can adjust to consistent standards, even a strict one. What they cannot adjust to is a moving target. A leader whose kindness is real, but whose follow through depends on how much bandwidth they have that particular week. This is the trap a lot of servant leaders fall into. You care so much about being available, being kind, being accommodating, that you never build the structure that would actually let your kindness sustain. And burnout doesn't just hurt you, it eventually hurts the very people you're trying to serve. Because a burned out leader cannot serve well. Systems aren't the opposite of a servant's heart. Systems are what protect a servant's heart long enough for it to actually last. Now let's talk about why Jesus' model included structure. Let's go back to the same passage that we anchored on last time, John chapter 13, when Jesus was washing feet. But I want you to notice something that we didn't cover in the last episode. This act of service happened within an incredibly structured framework. Jesus had already spent 3 years building a discipleship system, teaching rhythms, sending them out 2 by 2 with specific instructions, delegating authority, creating repeatable patterns of ministry that they could execute even when he wasn't physically present. And the foot washing wasn't Jesus abandoning structure in favor of raw sentiment. It was Jesus modeling servant posture inside of a highly intentional system he had spent years building. Service and structure were never in competition in his model. The structure is actually what made the service reproducible. Because after that night, the disciples didn't just remember a beautiful moment, they replicated the pattern. Structure is what turns a moment into a movement. T.D. Jakes has taught that vision comes to give you direction, but systems give you sustainability. And a leader who only has one of the two will eventually burn out trying to compensate for the missing piece with sheer willpower. Now let's talk about the 4 systems every single leader, servant leader, needs. And I want to give you 4 specific systems because build better systems is useless advice without specifics. Now, there are 4 things that I see missing most in our faith-driven business arena, our group of faith-driven business owners, entrepreneurs, businesses. So take note of these. System number 1, a clarity system of how decisions actually get made. Servant leadership does not mean every decision is made by committee or that you're constantly seeking consensus before you move. That is not humility. That's actually a failure to lead, and it can exhaust your team who need to know where the lines are of authority and where authority actually sits. Build a simple system. Which decisions will be made by you alone? Which decisions are made with input, but you have the final say? And which decisions genuinely belong to someone else on your team now? Write it down, and remember, ambiguity here creates far more friction than clear boundaries ever will. System number 2, a feedback system. How correction and encouragement both flow regularly, not just in crisis. A lot of servant leaders only give feedback when something goes wrong, which means that the only time your team hears from you directly about their performance is when they have failed. That trains people to associate your attention with fear. Build a rhythm, weekly or bi-weekly, where feedback flows in both directions, where encouragement is as scheduled as correction, so that neither one only shows up in emergencies. System number 3, a delegation system. How authority actually transfers, not just tasks. So this is the one that trips up most of our growing entrepreneurs, okay? You hand someone a task, but you don't hand them the authority that goes with it. So they end up doing the labor while still needing your approval on every single step of the decision-making along the way. And that is not delegation. That's just outsourced busy work with extra steps. And it can frustrate capable people in your organization. Real delegation transfers decision-making authority within clearly communicated boundaries, and it requires you to tolerate them doing it slightly differently than you would do it. That's hard, but it's important. System number 4, a rest system. How the team, including you, actually stops. Servant leadership without a rest system eventually produces leaders who serve out of depletion rather than overflow. And depleted service curdles into resentment faster than almost anything else in a working relationship. Build actual rhythms of Sabbath into your organizational calendar, not just as a nice idea, but as a structural non-negotiable. The same way that you would protect your clients' deadlines, you need to protect your employees' rest. So what happens when systems are missing? Let's talk about it. Let me paint the picture of what it looks like when these 4 systems are absent, because I think a lot of you are living right now and just don't have language for it. So without a clear clarity system, every decision becomes a negotiation, and your team starts coming to you for things that they should be able to decide for themselves because they genuinely don't know where their authority begins and ends. This slows everything down because now nobody can work. And it quietly teaches that you're more capable people, that their initiative to do things for you is going to be punished with more meetings and not rewarded with more trust. So if you're punishing their initiative and giving them more work they can't run because you're holding them back, that will cause them to not want to do more and come up with cool ideas and shine the way they should. Without a feedback system, small issues become large issues because nobody addressed them when they were small. And now correction feels like an attack instead of a normal part of team operations. Meanwhile, the people doing excellent work start to wonder if anyone has seen or noticed their work, because encouragement only ever shows up at the end of a correction. And you don't want that, right? Without a delegation system, you become the bottleneck of your own vision. The business cannot grow past your personal capacity, no matter how good your team is, because they're still waiting on your sign off for all things that they are fully capable of handling. This is the most single common ceiling that I see in faith-driven entrepreneurship businesses. Not a lack of vision, not a lack of talent on the team, but a leader who never actually transferred real authority. Without a real system, you and your team eventually run on fumes, and fumes produce short tempers, sloppy work, and slow erosion of the very culture that you're trying to build. Nobody serves well from an empty tank, no matter how good your intentions are. Benny Hinn has taught that even Jesus, in the fullness of his mission, withdrew regularly to the quiet places, modeling that withdrawal and rest were never signs of a small calling, but requirements for sustaining a larger one. So building systems without over-engineering. Let's talk about that really quickly, because we're almost done. I want to add an important caution here, because I've seen leaders overcorrect in the other direction, or in one direction or the other. Building so much process, so much bureaucracy, that the systems themselves become the thing crushing the humanity out of the culture. That's not the goal either. The goal is the minimum structure needed to create clarity and sustainability, not maximum structure for your own sake. A good test: does this system reduce anxiety and increase clarity for the people operating it? Or does it primarily exist to make you, the leader, feel more in control? If it is the second one, you built a control system wearing a system costume. Real systems serve the people inside of them. Control systems serve the leader's anxiety. Think about that. So let's talk about this week, okay? I want to give you something to apply. So here's your homework for part 3, before you get to part 3. Take an honest inventory of these 4 systems in your business right now: clarity, feedback, delegation, and rest. For each one, I want you to write down, does this actually exist as a system? Or does it only exist as my good intentions? And be honest, because most of us are stronger in one or 2 of these and genuinely weak in the other. Pick the weakest one out of the 3, just one. And this week, I want you to put a single constructive a single concrete structure in place around it. Not a perfect system, a starting one. And if it's delegation, identify one decision that you're currently the bottleneck for, and formally hand it off with real authority attached to it. If it's rest, put an actual reoccurring block on your calendar this week for you and your team, and protect it like you would a client deadline. Now, a few closing thoughts, okay? Vision without systems eventually collapses under its own weight. No matter how sincere it was, Jesus modeled service inside of structure, not outside of it, not instead of it. 3 years of building repeatable patterns before he ever washed a single foot. Your servant leadership needs to have the same foundation. Build the clarity, build the feedback, build the delegation, and build the rest that will let your service actually last beyond the season where you can hold it all together yourself in your own sheer effort. Now, next time, in part number 3, which I'm so excited about, we are going to bring vision and systems together into one practical framework that you can actually apply this month. So a model that you can hold in your hand and use, not just philosophy that you can admire, okay? So I will see you there. And remember, we say Godspeed because God is the driving force of everything that we do. So Godspeed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.